if we're going to grasp the ears of our citizenry when we want to talk about climate change, as it were, we need to establish some level of connection. And connectivity would start from driving an argument from an economic perspective.
We're not going to meet all of our goals by just focusing on mitigation.
Nigeria has been able to access an average about USD 1.9 billion per year of public and private capital and been able to invest that in climate-related activities, but it's just under 11% of what Nigeria actually needs to meet some of the targets that have been integrated in policies across board. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to another episode of What's with the Grid, a conversation with women who work in the energy space. This morning, we are doing the Climate Finance 2.0 episode, and that's because the last one was so popular. We had requests to please carry on with that conversation, and we decided to heed to those requests. This morning we have two very impressive ladies to shed more light on this climate finance issue, talk about what it means, and especially what it means in real life, and of course a bit of what it means for women, but more importantly what it means in terms of the infrastructure space, and to a certain extent the power of the global energy space, the Nigerian power sector as well. And here to do justice to this topic, first of all, I'd like to introduce Chintal Barot. Chintal is the founder of Co-Sustain Consulting. She has a 20-year consulting career, the past 10 of which have been spent working with investors, global companies, multilateral institutions, and policymakers on sustainable economic growth. Over the past decade, she has focused on climate and gender finance in emerging markets. She has worked in the financial, agriculture, retail, clean energy, natural resources, and ship recycling sectors. Way to go, Chintal. And she leads diverse teams to design and deliver complex global partnerships and programs in Asia and Africa. Chintal advises the EMBA and MBA students at Oxford University's Said Business School and Cambridge Judge Business School and participates in workshops and events. Chintal has also worked with us here on the UKNIAF program, just keeping us in shape and in line in terms of the climate agenda, the emerging global climate agenda, and what that means in a practical sense for the work that the UKNIAF program does. Also here, a very impressive Amazon, in her own right, we have Titilayo Oshodi. She's the special advisor to the Lagos State Governor on climate change and the circular economy. Gosh, I want to hear all about this and how you cope in a male-dominated space. Titi is a goal-oriented Nigerian, obviously, to get to this level. With extensive experience in numerous industries, she has proven administrative qualities spanning decades of hard work in the private sector, which eventually resulted in her recommendation to the public sector. She spent 4 years designing, creating, and executing sales and marketing strategies for multinational brands like MTN, PZ Cussons, and Nigerian Breweries PLC. Titi joined African Access Limited in January 2014 as their general manager, and there she helped pivot the company's human resource and administrative responsibilities. Among many projects, she oversaw the training and advocacy platforms funded by FCDO, then TFID, for federal government parastatals in Nigeria. Impressive. Welcome, Titi, and thank you for being here. All right, so let's get into it, ladies. Chintal. Is it possible for you to please do a bit of context setting for us? So this whole climate finance issue, can you just lay out the parameters for us from your rich and extensive global experience on this matter? What's going on?
Well, firstly, thanks very much, Stella, for having me, and thanks for that very grand introduction. I'm feeling a bit under pressure now to live up to that. So I think in terms of context setting, it's important for us just to take a step back and start with what is climate finance, because I have a feeling that it probably means all things to all people. And in recognition of that, what we did in UKNIAF some time ago is actually we created this briefing paper where we tried to sort of spell out what do we mean by climate finance. There is no universal definition. The way that we define it is it's basically financing for any credible climate action, whether that's resilience, adaptation, or mitigation. And climate finance can be used for a variety of different things, most obviously renewable energy, energy efficiency, but things like climate smart agriculture. Basically, any kind of climate smart infrastructure can be eligible for climate finance. And then it's okay, well, what form does it take? So we typically differentiate climate finance into sort of two parts. One is what we call the investment instruments, and the second is non-investment instruments. So non-investment is typically your grants. When we come into the investment instruments, this is things like equity, debt, bonds, guarantees, and insurance. And I think it's important to make that distinction because, again, I have a feeling that there may be a little bit of muddling for different people depending on the vantage point in which they come. And then I think it's also helpful to think about what are the different sources of climate finance. So we set out 4 different sources, broadly speaking. One is your domestic public finance, which is the government purse strings and government budgeting. Then there's the international public finance. And this can be at the top of mind for many people because these are the big, large international funds, and they can be under what we call the UNFCCC umbrella or outside of it. So, many people will have heard, for example, of the Green Climate Fund, which, as we know, is one of the largest climate funds, and that is under the rubric of the UNFCCC. Then we have private financing. That's both the domestic private finance sector and the international private finance sector. So your banks and investment funds and so on. Globally, climate finance is on the rise. So data from the Climate Policy Initiative shows an annual average of about $1.3 trillion, but that's still far short of the 10 trillion that is needed. It's an estimation, but it's what we expect is needed year on year. And the last couple of points to make is most of the climate finance that has been unlocked to date is going into mitigation activities. So these are your kind of slightly larger scale, for example, renewable energy projects, your slightly larger scale infrastructure projects. And the highest volume of finance, again, according to the CPI data, is through what we call project level market rate debt. Now, there's a lot of sort of terminologies here, but I sketched that out because I think it's helpful at least just to keep in mind what it is that we're talking about when we talk about climate finance. And lastly, just to say, is I think many of us know, Nigeria has actually unlocked a really small amount of climate finance so far. And that's all of the sources, whether it's at the international level or domestic level. And in 2020, I think only over 10% of its climate financing needs was met. So we know that there's a real need to ramp that up.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Chintal. That's spot on. When you hear the figure, the estimates say, okay, Nigeria has been able to access an average about USD 1.9 billion per year of public and private capital and been able to invest that in climate-related activities. But then the sad part is that sounds like a huge amount of money, but it's just under 11% of what Nigeria actually needs to meet some of the targets that have been integrated in policies across board. But there was an interesting point you made about most of this funding going into mitigation activities. That kind of skew, is that kind of disparity, though? Are we going to be able to meet our goals if the funding is just skewed towards mitigation?
Yeah, it's an excellent question. And we're not going to meet all of our goals by just focusing on mitigation, particularly because we know that, the temperature is rising. We are really locked into a temperature rise now, even though the UNFCCC mechanisms are trying to keep it below 1.5 degrees. And many people think that that's now looking like a highly ambitious target. So if we think about the impacts of that temperature rise, we can see that. All we have to do is open our TVs and look at the news day in, day out, or, across the world when you see the scales of the floods and so on. So if you think about achieving our goals in terms of adaptation, resilience, of buildings, of people's communities, we really do need to focus on resilience and adaptation, purely because we are now locked into increasing temperature rises, increasing floods, basically an increase in extreme temperatures and extreme weather events.
Yeah, completely agree. I mean, maybe it's time to pull Titi in, but it seems to me like the perception is as long as we're doing renewables, that's fine. We're on track. We're unlocking funding for renewable energy projects. And that means we're compliant and we're on the way there. Maybe to hear from Titi about what's unique about the Lagos experience.
Thank you so much for this opportunity. So yes, it's always a delightful opportunity for us to share what Lagos State is doing. Just like I explained earlier on, that our office is an uncharted path right now, and it's just barely about a year old. But there's also been a lot that has happened and that has quite a number of outcomes in the different ministries, especially the Ministry of Environment in the area of climate change. There is a department there that essentially works closely with the LOMA agency, which is the Waste Management Agency, and some of the other affiliations, such as the Environmental Protection Agency, and we also have the Green Park, the deal in the deforestation aspect. But even more importantly, just understanding that climate change is no longer a global issue. It's pretty much a local one right now, even though upon resumption, we see that it has become somewhat of a buzzword. And even I didn't know so much about climate change until I assumed the role as a special advisor. But I do know over time now that I have learned and I have been able to share that understanding that it is affecting every area of our lives, from energy to our water systems, to our food supply, to our health, to our transportation as well, and that there's a need for us to mitigate these impacts. And you can't mitigate, and you cannot talk about risk mitigation if you're not talking about finance. So they must go hand in hand. And so financial sustainability is important. And that means that we need to have infrastructure and be able to drive as much investment in climate smart initiatives. And so for Lagos State, we're building these climate resilient infrastructures and a sustainable urban development portfolio. If you take a look at the transport ministry, the transport trajectory that we have, we're positioned as a coastal city and as well as a mega city because we're an emerging economy. We understand that within the purview, within the gamut of our themes agenda, making Lagos a 21st century economy is one of the things that will pivot or that will essentially underline the strategies that we want to adopt to drive sustainability. And that's where I can safely start to talk about what we're doing in the transport sector, transitioning from just the linear, getting into a more deeper level of intermodal transportation system. You would notice that we have established our Blue Rail, and we're almost very, very soon going to be launching the Red Line. And we've also been able to establish a lot of infrastructure in terms of our ease of movement, ease of commerce through our waterways and rail and even on the road, and driving that infrastructure even from a digital perspective. There are quite a number of things that we're doing in the area of agriculture as well, establishing green hubs, establishing agricultural farm hubs, within our communities, and inherently working and institutionalizing a level of waste management that can also help us to drive green economy, green energy, from the level of waste. Some of the things that we are doing from the Office of Climate Change is to align Lagos with the global best practices, especially through our circular economy. Like I said again, because climate change has become a buzzword, we realize that we cannot, there's that economic argument that has to precede the political argument. For us as an emerging economy, if we're going to grasp the ears of our citizenry when we want to talk about climate change, as it were, even if it sounds abstract, we need to establish some level of connection. And connectivity will start from driving an argument from an economic perspective. So what it means to us is that if we're driving behavioral attitude, if we want to induce our communities and our citizenry, induce them away from a linear economy into a circular economy where they begin to dispose efficiently their waste, or they're able to optimize resources, then that means that we need to infuse components of incentivization. We need to drive the need for them to see where it benefits for them in the pocket. We can also help them to expand their businesses, because as we give them access to more market, more jobs are created, and they're also able to expand operations and scale businesses either for diversification or for increase or for expansion.
If I may just...
Yes.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. Just, you're saying
That's
so
fine.
many interesting things, and my notepad is like full of, pictures and emojis. No, not bad things. I'm impressed. Of course, I wouldn't have expected any less, because Lagos State always tends to be a couple of steps ahead in terms of policy and in terms of this going down the uncharted path. So well done for all of the great work. And I, just after I've asked you this question, you probably would like to get back to what you're saying, but the question is just rising up within me on its own, and I couldn't just stop myself from interrupting you. Anyway, so, when you say it's an uncharted path, that really resonates with me, and I'm sure Chintal as well, because, so for instance, I know the types of battles that we've had trying to bring the climate conversation into spaces that don't normally or don't typically prioritize climate change issues. So, like when the whole shift towards when the Climate Change Act was passed into law and all of this energy transition thing happened in country. And as a program, we were looking at, okay, so how do we get the climate conversation and issues embedded in some core sectors like the power sector, for example? And the type of response and reaction that came initially was like, oh, come on, we haven't finished preparing the main dish. We haven't finished preparing the main meal. And you're asking us, where's the ice cream for the dessert? It's like, we have more important things to focus on. And this will come when we fix the grid, when we've done everything we're supposed to do. So trying to sort of, just like what you said, situating that within an economic, just finding the right argument that resonates with the people you're working with is crucial. And it's impressive to hear that that's happening there. I was just wondering what role data is playing in all of this and how you gauge the response to what you're trying to do from both the people perspective and also from the perspective of other policymakers in this space. Because when it comes to climate, you kind of need to pull in different sectors together. How is this landing in practical terms?
Yes, we have also suffered a bit in the area of deficient data. One of the things that came to fore as soon as we started to design initiatives was the gap in ascertaining the level of social impact. So I can talk about two of the initiatives that we ran. One of them was at a correctional facility at 𝘗𝗶𝗁 in Surulere, and it was a girls' correctional facility. What we did was drive a model of climate literacy, capacity building for the young girls who are in incarceration to be able to understand how they can convert and produce new products, fashion products, or housing, interior decoration items using plastic waste to do that. On the flip side, we also engendered a sense of worth, a sense of inclusivity into their minds, just giving them the sort of skill, upscaling skill, such that when they come out of incarceration, they can be more useful, they can be more productive, and then we can mitigate the risk of them going back into what made them go into incarceration in the first place. In that same space, we were able to establish a conversion of the organic waste that is being generated by the correctional facility by establishing a biodigester such that it's able to convert and get them into clean cooking.
Okay, thank you very much. Some very impressive work going on, and thank you for taking the time to share. So I'll just pivot to Chintal now. I mean, Titi has said a lot and some very interesting highlights there. For me, I picked up the issue of gender, for example, with the women in prisons. I picked up the question of the economics of this whole conversation. And then I think very importantly, I also picked up on the issue of accessing climate finance and what types of things a state government needs to bear in mind to have more access. So I'm just wondering whether on any of these points or anything else that struck you while she was speaking, what your own thoughts are. That's for Chintal.
Thanks, Stella. And thanks, Titi. There's a huge amount in there. So I'm trying to think about what I respond to. A few things. I think the gender and then economics and accessing finance, definitely I've got some thoughts. But before that, I want to just quickly respond to what Titi was saying about climate change, being this bit of a buzzword. And she said something which I thought was really important, which is that climate change isn't something out there globally. It's a local issue. And what I would add to that is and I think it's demonstrated by everything that she's been saying, it's a local development issue. And
Absolutely.
one of the things, Stella, that we've been talking about in the program is this reframing of climate change and climate finance as something that's out there to something that is actually inextricably linked to development. And that, I think, can help to the point that you made very early on, which is how do we have these conversations? How do we help people to connect the dots? And I think if the more we can show that it is a local development issue, the easier it will be to convince people to tackle it in a kind of a joined up way, rather than seeing it something as a sort of a nice to have or a bolt on. And some of the examples that Titi gave really speak to that. When you talk about renewable energy access, you're talking about access to affordable, clean energy for those that don't have it. That is a development priority, it's a development issue. When you talk about agriculture and you talk about climate smart agriculture, because we know that agriculture does need to adapt to a changing climate, that is a food security issue. The green economy, when we talk about whether it's e-vehicles or other types of industries, are creating jobs, which is a direct economic issue. So I think that reframing is really important. Then we come to this point. I'll tackle the maybe accessing climate finance piece first and then go on to the gender bit. What we found in the work that we do under our infrastructure finance component is that states need a lot of help when it comes to developing projects to put in front of investors. So, for investors to put their money on the table, they need to be really convinced of the risk, the opportunity, the return. And if you don't have a credible project proposal, it's just clearly not going to get funded. So give an example of that. As you know, we've been working with Nasarawa State government for quite some time now. They really identified the lack of on-site student accommodation in Nasarawa State University as a really important priority for them. So we have been providing some hand-holding support, TA, and a bunch of things to take them from looking at this project, what we call sort of pre-feasibility, to developing concept note to say, is this a viable investment opportunity? And that's where I think the really big questions come in, because when you look at we say either project or investment opportunity, but for the investors, it's an investment opportunity. Can I invest in this project? And so when we looked at the concept note, we said, is this an investment opportunity? Yes, it is. And then helped to develop an outline business case. And now the project has proceeded onto the procurement stage. And all of that really matters because the technical details matter. Having a robust financial model matters. Having a really well thought through sort of methodology matters. And then to come on to the point about climate and gender, how do you mainstream climate and gender into this project? One, because it's a risk. So there's no point building student accommodation that's going to get flooded and nobody wants to live there. The team have designed, we call up sort of passive systems so that it reduces the need for things like grid-powered ACs, for example. So, it helps the building to keep cooler without the need for power. And so things like that form part of this sort of quite solid business proposal. And that process, I think through that process, we've seen the value of a state government really spending the time and energy to develop this credible proposal, because at the end of it, when Nasarawa held a bidders conference, you saw a huge amount of interest from local developers, and we had, I forget what exact number now, I think between 3 to 5 really good quality proposals from good quality developers, and now that project is sort of progressing on. So I say all of that to say, the question about how do you access climate finance, or actually any type of finance, it's all of those things which are so important. And then finally, your point about gender. So there's something that we coin gender smart climate finance. I'm sort of a bit loath to throw out loads of acronyms, but it's a term that I worked on with 2X Global, and we developed a whole toolkit actually, which was supported by sort of BII and a few other development finance institutions to say, what do we actually mean? If we put our investor hat on, what do we mean by gender smart climate finance? And it's at a very simple level. It's looking at a project and saying, are we looking at it through a climate lens and are we looking at it through a gender lens? And given that we're half the population, there is an opportunity to look at everything with a gender lens. And given what we know about climate change, there's an opportunity to look at everything with a climate lens to a greater or lesser extent. And then finally on that, I would say, why do that? right? Why do that? So perhaps you're convinced about the development case. So having more women accessing jobs, increasing their incomes, increasing their safety and security, access to education. Maybe you're convinced about that, but you might be thinking, well, why do it economically? We now know that there's a real business case. So companies with more than 30% women in top management have 20% higher net internal rate of return. That's research by IFC and 𝘚𝗶𝗁. That's a real business imperative.
Absolutely.
So the question is, are you actually missing out on a business opportunity and business profitability by not thinking about women? And that's at all stages. This is just an employment figure, but we know that there's opportunities in the supply chain, there's entrepreneurs and so on.
Awesome. Yeah, that's quite impressive. And yeah, I mean, last time we had Jessica Espinosa on here, who's the CEO of 2X Global, and she went into great, depth about some of what 2X Global is doing in terms of mobilizing climate finance and ensuring that women have access to this. And I think it's really impressive work. Just back to Titi, I was just wondering, when you were speaking, you said something about the economic case versus the political case, and very interesting and impressive strategy of sitting on the economic case so that you get leverage and you get people interest and you get buy-in. And Chintal complemented that by talking about the development case as well, because everyone wants to deliver development, or most people in leadership. I haven't quite heard the case put in that way, like split. So I'm just interested in what the political case is. I mean, the economic case is very clear. And as someone sitting in your office, I'm sure you can tell us a bit about that. When you say there's an economic case, which I understand very well, and then you say there's a political case, what's the latter?
So the political case would be between balancing the lifestyle of the communities, providing environmental comfort against providing economic comfort. And we can go the route of the stick and enforce these policies from a political standpoint. However, the economics of it is that there is a cost to enforcement and there is a cost to advocacy. Now, which route would be more effective on a long term? So we could have on a short term the policies and have the enforcement and the reforms and all of the incentives, so to speak, or those areas that are deterrents embedded in the policy, and get the people, whether they like it or not, to abide or to comply. However, it is even more efficient and effective on a long term to have the people understand that there is a need for a change of behavior, but also understanding that if you need that change of attitude, then it must be an engendering process where they also see the vision and they buy and plug into it because there's a benefit for them. Mm-hmm. And we can then establish a maintenance culture, which we, primarily lack. We can then engender and foster a maintenance culture so that there's sustainability in that behavioral attitude, in the climate-friendly attitude that is required for us to live.
Well done. I think that was very, very aptly put. And I both admire you, and I don't know, I just wonder whether the right phrase is, I admire her, and I also feel a bit sorry for her.
Yes.
There's so much work to do.
I think it's sorry for me. I think it's sorry for me because, like I said again, and note that I said on a long term, because we also need to take our nuance, our mental framework, the way we think as Africans, as Nigerians. For government, it's easy for us to jump on the wagon of enforcement. Because we find that the stick approach may give us that quick win that we require. But is it sustainable?
It's not sustainable. I hear you. So it needs to be a combination.
So that is the question. Yes.
Yes, very well put. So my question now to the both of you, and maybe Chintal might want to respond to this first, and I'd like to hear what Titi has to say about this as well. Is gender is it part of the economic or the political case? Where would you situate that?
Is that for Chintal or for me?
Chintal first, and then
all right.
I just want to give you a bit of a breather because you... Yes, Chintal.
I think it's both. The economics, I just sort of gave out, a stat or two before. When you think about half the population being women, who is the economy designed for? if the economy is not designed for half the women, one, they can't participate, and two, they can't contribute and grow it, So it's, I think with, the body of work we now have over the past few decades, we have ample evidence about gender smart economies and the case for that. And I think it is political. We know that globally women's representation at the political levels is very low. And so again, if you don't have half the world's population even somewhat equally represented at the political level, then again, how do you make sure that your vision, as Titi was saying, and your policies are fit for purpose and that they are considering the needs and catering to half the world's population? And I should add that when it comes to climate change, we do have pockets of evidence now that shows that when women are in positions of power, they prioritize climate action. They tend to deliver more results when it comes to climate outcomes. And so if you have more women at those political levels, then actually there's a dual benefit there, not only economically and socioeconomically, but also environmentally and for climate change.
I see. Thank you. Very well put. Titi, from a practical perspective, what do you think?
I totally agree.
Practical government. Chintal is practical, but from a practical government perspective, as someone who's a policymaker, policy person, what do you think?
Totally ditto. I'm going to snap my fingers to what she had said, and I think it's well on point. Women, from a political perspective, are more strategic and more integral as influencers because they're homemakers, they're community builders. As a woman, I can totally connect with establishing a climate-friendly environment, a climate-friendly behavior towards a climate-friendly environment. I can talk to my children about it. I can talk to my neighbors about it. I can, go a step further and talk about how I can economically develop the minds of people or economically develop the pockets of people because of opportunities that are inherent within the value chain of circular economy as an approach to tackle climate change. And I can also work hand in hand with the youth demographic, because it's a demographic that is very critical right now in the value chain of influencing. You can find that women are more amenable to transferring of knowledge. And I don't mean that in a condescending way. I just feel that there's a little bit more patience, a little bit more tolerance, and a little bit more of interconnectivity from an emotional
most
perspective.
Of the time, not always, though. Most of
not all, but most of the time.
Yes.
But because that woman is the homemaker, she is the one that is developing the mindset of the young ones, then she's more exposed to transferring the kind of knowledge that is required. And so if a woman is knowledgeable and well-versed in effective management of waste, in resource management, in budgetary allocations, in fusing sustainable components into a circular procurement model, then you're more inherently going to find people who will be more interested in what waste management or circular economy is about.
Completely agree. Yeah, well said. It's a big if, though.
Yes,
if they're knowledgeable.
It is. But even from our data, from the projects that we have run, we have found that women are more prevalent, and we have found that the success of it has been as a function of the involvement of women who have driven the young ones to be involved, participated.
See.
So who handles waste in the house, really? It's pretty much, a lot of times it's the women.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I agree. From a Nigerian perspective.
Yes, from a Nigerian perspective.
I don't know, for some reason, I noticed that. Exactly. I noticed most times in the UK, the people you see wheeling the waste basket out for collection on waste collection days are actually the men. So, yeah, Nigeria.
Don't they get paid for it?
The men. You mean, do the wives pay them?
The men get paid.
The wives? Who pay? What type of payment are we?
So
cash or kind?
So when the men wheel out, do they do that as their job? Oh, when they wheel it out in the house.
Exactly.
What you mean?
Sort of like the household sharing of responsibility. It's sort of, I kind of see more men in the UK just wheeling the waste.
Who does the sorting?
Sometimes they do. It's sort of like an understanding.
That's the heavy
you handle the rubbish. No, I was just
saying.
Who
handles the sorting? Who handles the sorting?
Yes, I'm saying that. In the UK, a lot of time I've seen men. It's sort of like an unspoken division, like an unspoken gender division of labor in the household. You see, actually see the men. And very interestingly, our Nigerian brothers just, aligning with that, wheeling the trash out and just sort it, put it in which one is supposed to go in green or blue or whatever, and they wheel it out. Yeah. Chantal's smiling. I mean, views about waste and who handles waste. But I agree. I mean, we are speaking to the Nigerian context, so you're absolutely correct. Final question from me for you, Titi, is for states that would want to try to do more on this, access more climate finance, what for you, 3 bullets that you think are learning points from Lagos State that might be adapted, and then 1 bullet that says, this is a challenge from where I sit that I'm still kind of trying to navigate. So 3 bullets, what can other states learn from you? 1 bullet, challenge you're trying to navigate in this space. And I actually do mean bullets.
You mean bullets? I think that our electric mobility projects are one of the areas that other states can look into. I think that the land is available. I think that the infrastructure, in terms of if they adopt a PPP model, just like we have as well, because I'm sure that there are private sector corporates in other states that can also help them to be well positioned for that sort of infrastructure. And it will definitely be seated in grabbing the global stocktake that is necessary in green energy and also fostering productivity in their livelihood. I think that renewable energy investment is another area. We have driven a lot in the area of solar energy powered projects. We have touched on, even within the organizations in Lagos State, within the forming of Lagos State, we've started talking about green buildings. We're doing green energy initiatives. We're creating more opportunities within our skill acquisition schools. So they're learning more about solar panels and renewable energy. And I think that that's another way that we can improve the landscape of job creation. And other states can also look into that area. I think also that leveraging climate financing instruments, that's some of the things that we are doing. In my office, we have what we call the Economy Business Network, and we've curated about 400 nano and micro SMEs who are already operating within the sustainable green market. And we've built business support. We've opened up the space for access to market for them. We've established an internal feeding mechanism where they can begin to provide and supply. We can create demand and supply mechanisms, between them. We can also foster some level of collaboration and partnership. But more importantly, we have opened them up to funding, by establishing a cooperative system, a cooperative platform, such that they are not only attractive to funding organizations, but they're also strengthened, to be able to expand the scope of the work or the businesses that they do. So that collaboration also can happen with other states, helping them to be more attractive to funding, because I know that there are quite a number. For instance, in Oyo State, a lot of MSMEs who operate in Lagos also have factories and their land, based on a landmass opportunity. They operate their heavy lifting in Oyo State, in Ibadan. So just making sure that their government is also helping them to drive and harness those opportunities. And I think that harnessing the power of the burgeoning youth demographic, because, statistics says that we have about 60% of the growing economy that is made up of the youth between 25 to 40, and so there's so many opportunities and there's so many positives and potentials that we can drive with that demographic. They're young, they're innovative, they have a lot of exposure to technology, so if we have an estimated 77 million as African Development Bank has declared, then we can begin to position them, because areas like the creative industry, the artificial intelligence, or food systems or technology, developing skills in those areas and also helping them to channel their energies across these borders, because they're very used to working without walls, so if we're able to foster partnerships across board from state to state, okay, I think that will definitely go a long way to driving the community What challenge?
One challenge that you've
I think that one of the challenges that I may mention is the funding gaps and access to finance. I just got back from UNGA and I was very excited when I went for the session with the African Development Bank. They're beginning to look into finance vehicles. They have the one that is called the Youth Employment, something that is designed for as a green wallet that our young ones can begin to look into. So that is a gaping gap, and we need to start to do something about that, especially for African cities like Lagos, because there are opportunities out there. We need to look for green bonds. We need to drive blended finance with partners, the private sector. We need to establish some form of loan guarantee mechanism for the businesses that exist in that space. And how can we access the climate funds? We have, like I said again, our economic business network. We continuously help them in building capacity so that they are attractive for the climate fund that everybody keeps talking about. Okay. What are the fiduciary processes that they need to do? That's one of the big ones for me.
Excellent. So renewables, leveraging the youth demographic, leveraging finance climate instruments, very impressive. I noticed you talked a lot about the youth. Just to point out that, my father is in his 70s and he still identifies as a youth and he's ready to barge in on youth meetings and say, what's the problem? Were you there the day I was born? So in Nigeria, sometimes it can be tricky to actually say, okay, who are these youth? But that's just anecdotal. Chintal, so apart from the very helpful, useful work you've done with, we've done together and, we've done on the UKNIAF team, I'm just wondering, you have, a really strong global profile as well. I'm just wondering for you, 4 bullet points that you take away from some of the work you've done with 2X Global, some of the work you've done when you've advised the side business school at Oxford. Like, what kind of things would you say to people working in the Nigerian context about this issue based on your learnings from outside? So 4 bullets, please. Thank you.
Crikey.
You can do it, Chintal. Go, go, go.
Now I have to think. I can't. Okay, so the work I do, with 2X Global, that's spanning over 5 years now. So, having helped to sort of set up the initial iteration and continuing to advise them. There's a specific role that I have on 2X Global, which is to facilitate one of our, what we call communities of practices. And that's the COP with the investment officers. So these are all the transaction officers in all of your major DFIs and MDBs, like your BIIs, like FMO, DFC, which is, US's.
Okay, so the acronyms.
Yeah. So basically, if you think about, the whole gambit of development finance institutions and multilateral development banks, that's the group that I've been working with quite closely. It is really clear that they have been looking to deploy their capital with a climate lens, and that has grown in sophistication over the past few years. And then over the last, 5 to 7 years, particularly since they launched 2X Global, the appetite and the sophistication with which they are looking at transactions with a gender lens has also increased. And you see that Jessica last time spoke about the 2X challenge, which is the commitment. So it's great to say we're all doing all of this stuff, but what do the numbers say? And the 2X challenge says, we will meet X billion in gender lens investing by X date. So at that very sort of top level, even though the total amount within 2X challenges a drop in the ocean of global finance, it is still quite a tremendous achievement. So I would say that Nigerian states, Nigerian companies that want to position themselves to be at the forefront of what's going on globally will find that opportunity in being climate smart and gender smart. And there is financing out there. And the trends certainly point to that. And it's not just at the global level. We have in 𝘄𝗶𝗁 Global, there are a number of Nigerian institutions, that's fund managers and others, who are actively looking again to deploy their capital with a gender lens. So I see this trend as here to stay. I don't think it's just a fad. Then I think the second thing, maybe, you also mentioned sort of what am I seeing from sort of a very different hat, which is the Said Business School and also Cambridge Judge Business School. And this may also be a little bit of a self-selecting group, because the MBAs and the MBAs that I coach are already really interested in like a sustainability and climate change or a gender career. But I've seen that increase. I've seen the number of students that are really interested in this space increase over the last, 7 years that I've been doing it. And they are asking questions, again, that can be more sophisticated than I initially encountered. So where people have a little bit of knowledge and experience, they're now saying, okay, what are the other opportunities, whether it's in sustainable finance, sustainable investing, climate finance, and so on? How do I get access to those opportunities? And so you see this real appetite. So to the point that Titi was making about youth and those people that are in higher education, I think the appetite is there, and it definitely needs to be nurtured, because that is our talent for the future.
Awesome. So I have your 3 bullets. I have Okay, so if Nigeria wants to access more climate finance, because we've said we're hugely short of what we need to meet the targets we've set for ourselves as a country, it might be useful to take another look at how we're applying the gender lens to some of what we're trying to do. Might be useful to look at the sustainability angle and how what we're trying to do is sustainable, and how we're saying that in the documents we're putting forward. And I think Titi also touched on the sustainability issue. And then it's important to stay in touch with what's happening in the rest of the world, right? So there's Nigeria. Yes, the climate agenda is domestic. It's no longer, we can't call it a global issue anymore. But then I'm sure we all agree on the fact that, okay, so it is a domestic issue, but we need to stay in touch with what's happening in the global space if we're going to access some of the financing that's out there and what the expectations are for the people who are doing the investing. I think you've both touched on all of this incredibly well. And it's been a fascinating conversation, very interesting. I hadn't even noticed that time had gone by. I wish we could carry on, but we do need to call it a day today. I don't know if either of you have any just very pressing last bullet points. Otherwise, we'd call it a day. But it has to be just a bullet, though.
Well, I just want to say that it's important, especially because of this platform that I'm sharing on, to encourage a climate smart infrastructure as not just a financial commitment, but also an investment for the future, so every investment or every project that we run, whether small or big, contributes to building a resilient planet for us. It's also an opportunity to market Lagos, Nigeria, and say that we're open for business, and we definitely would like a lot more partnership in some of the vehicles that we have drawn up for our communities. Thank you.
Thank you, Titi. A very long bullet, but a bullet. Otherwise, thank you. You kept it to a bullet. Well done. Chantal, any last bullet from you?
I think Titi's captured it superbly. I just want to say, thank you to her. I think the insights from Lagos and those really practical examples, I personally found them really insightful. And thank you to you, Stella, for your masterful facilitation as always.
Yeah, you are an easy team to facilitate. So thank you. Thank you both for your time. And
not me with the long bullets. No,
the long bullets were absolutely important. Thank you both. And at this juncture, we come to the end of today's episode of What's with the Grid. And thank you very much, Chantal and Titi, for the very intelligent, very insightful perspectives you've put on the table. Thank you to our listening audience for their active participation and all the feedback we get from them online. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you to the Nextier team who's handling the recording and the equipment, and will do the cleanup after now. And to our audience, don't forget to join us next time for another episode of What's with the Grid. Thank you for your time and have a lovely day.